I have often wondered, what are all the roles a doctor could possibly have? If my guest today were at a coffee shop wearing a white coat, you might be able to infer that he's a cardiologist. Perhaps even that he's a very well accomplished scientific investigator. Maybe some of you would even successfully speculate that he must be an educator, good at both spoken and written communication. But the list of accomplishments for my guest today is much longer. He has done just about any and everything you can think of in the field of biomedical sciences. From being a medical school's executive vice dean to being an advocate, an entrepreneur, the editorial board member of several leading scientific journals, the president of several scientific societies. He is also Penn's chief scientific officer and the professor of cardiovascular research. Please welcome my guest at this time, Jonathan Epstein. Dr. Epstein, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Very kind introduction.
Thank you so much. Now, I want to know, to reach a point in your career where you are, I imagine it must have, taught you a lot of practical skills along the way. I think you need a lot of practicality to be where you are in terms of management, negotiations, and a whole list of leadership skills. So, what is it in your career that has helped you the most to gather those skills and nurture them?
That's an excellent question. I think one of the wonderful things about careers in academia and in academic medicine is the chance to do different things at different stages. And I think each one of those experiences contributes to who you are and to how you carry out your job. So I think I learned a fair bit about how to interact with people and how to lead being an intern, being a resident. But I learned a lot more being a department chair later. And I think one of the good aspects of the careers that we all follow is that we're all pretty excited about learning all the time. So I think most of us are willing to adapt over time. I certainly have had to.
Now, I was recently reading an article of yours where you talk about your first meeting at the American Society for Clinical Investigation back in Chicago in 2001. And you talk about some of the nervousness that happened to you in that meeting when you met some Nobel laureates who were at your research poster. So do you have any anecdotes to share about that experience with our viewers?
Yeah, well, I think the surprising fact that comes to light as you get a little older in the field is what a small community it is. That you run into the same people again and again, and that you actually do run into the Nobel laureates. And they actually are interested in your science, even as a relatively young scientist. So you're referring to something I wrote about when I was presenting a poster at the American Society of Clinical Investigation. And Goldstein and Brown came to look at my work, Nobel laureates who discovered really the pills that we use to treat cholesterol now. And they're considered sort of the top of the heap in cardiology research areas. So I was certainly in awe and scared. But what amazed me is that they didn't talk to me at first. They looked in detail at my poster, and they understood every aspect of it immediately. They started asking me very specific questions, quizzing me. And I was only saved by our dean at the time, Dr. Rubenstein, who came by and said to Goldstein and Brown, "Don't you dare recruit him." Then they lightened up and let me go. But in fact, a week later, they sent me a letter asking if I'd come to visit Southwestern, and they were eager to try to recruit me at the time. So, but I think the message is that the people you run into at meetings, invited for talks, they are the people who are going to give you jobs later, who are going to recruit you, or they'll be your colleagues.
So what are some of the best practices for networking at these scientific meetings and conferences? And do those practices evolve over time?
Advice I would give is don't try to manipulate the system. Don't try to game the system. Don't try to network just for the sake of networking. It's your contribution, your science, your clinical observations that will win the day. But also don't be too shy. So if you have something to say, get out there and say it. Talk to people about real substance. But boasting and bragging is easily seen through. And I think that's true at every stage. Can I
Back.
add one thing? And that is, don't be intimidated by people who might seem to you to be famous, or, they're looking to meet good, smart people. They're looking to recruit good students and good faculty. So you're doing them a favor by introducing yourself to them, by having lunch, by sitting down at the meeting near them, and just chatting. So don't be too intimidated either.
We'll certainly keep that in mind next time. Now, what is your research interest about?
The main focus of my lab has been sort of the same for a number of years, although the specific experiments and types of avenues we've taken is a little different, but the theme is the same. And that is that by looking at processes that happen in the developing embryo, when things happen very fast, we can learn about biology and apply that knowledge and those cassettes of understanding to adult disease. And an example I often use is that in the emergency room, when a patient comes in with heart failure or other cardiac conditions, we measure things in their blood that we call biomarkers of disease, like atrial natriuretic factor. But that's really an embryonic gene that's been re-expressed at the time of disease. And by understanding how it's regulated in the embryo, it teaches us about why it comes on in adult disease. And we've done some work, for instance, in that area.
So, one issue that I see a lot of my colleagues, myself facing, is that when you're a medical student, and I'm sure this would have been true when you were a medical student, there are 1,000 different paths and directions you can go into.
Yeah.
There are opportunities in presenting themselves before you at every hour.
I think that it's important to know that you're not picking a topic that you have to study the rest of your life. I advise people to think about how to avoid a topic that they won't like, because there's a million topics you will like. So the trick is not to get yourself in a position where you're unhappy or unproductive, but don't worry too much about whether you pick the one right thing. And by my own history, I was studying membrane transport when I was a medical student, of how ions move across membranes. Nothing to do with what I study now. I didn't get interested in developmental biology until I was done with my cardiology fellowship, not till late in my career. But what I had learned is how to ask a scientific question, how to realistically address a question in the laboratory with experimental tools, with animal models. And that knowledge you can apply to anything. So, believe it or not, the questions and the tools will change incredibly over your own career. So it's not as if you can gather enough information about one topic today as a student that's going to, suffice to support your entire career anyway. The whole trick is to learn how to learn. And that's what you should be doing now. So you can switch later. I did my postdoc after my cardiology fellowship in eye development, because it's a classic system to study developing organs. And then I switched and applied it to the heart when I started my own laboratory, relatively late.
So it's interesting that you mention it because, I think the conventional knowledge, wisdom imparted at least through undergraduate education is that, the importance of a PhD becomes really, really stressed on. And you, for one, are a physician scientist without a formal PhD. So was there ever a time, or even now, is there ever a time when you look back and think, maybe I should have gotten a PhD? What has that experience been like, writing grants, meeting researchers? Do they take you as seriously?
Yes. Oh, I'm very interested in this topic, actually. I'm interested in the relationship between MDs and PhDs, the both the synergy and the tension that exists between them. I actually had applied to PhD programs after college before I decided to go to medical school, and had been accepted. I was going to go to Oxford to biochemistry, but my girlfriend didn't want to move. So I decided I wouldn't do that, and worked in a laboratory instead. And during that time working as a technician, I realized that I didn't really understand the physiology of the systems I was studying the biochemistry of, and that I would be interested in going to medical school to learn. So I went to medical school and wrote a thesis, did research, but was in too much of a hurry. And was offered a position as a research resident where I could do some research and residency, and chose that route instead. And I think the lesson is that there are many routes. There's not just one path. And you have to find the one that supports your instincts the best along the way.
I think that is incredible, because I see, people often, speculating that because they don't have that extra degree, they will not be able to make as much contribution or have as much impact as they'd like.
Mhm.
But you've clearly shown us otherwise.
I have been self-conscious about it at times. I think I've gone the extra mile to prove to my PhD colleagues that I knew what I was talking about at times. When I became chair of a basic science department here at Penn, I was the only MD in the department. And I felt that I had to earn the confidence of my colleagues.
Yeah, that is phenomenal. And this year marks the 20th year of you being on the faculty here at Penn. So what are some of the
That's hard for me to believe.
well,
It's true, though.
so what are some of the moments that have sort of been the highlight of your career and really stand out to you as you look back at those 20 years?
Yeah. Again, I've had the real luck of being able to play different roles. And I've loved attending in the intensive care unit and at the VA hospital. I could tell stories of individual patients that have been highlights in those moments of, quick decision that make cardiology exciting. Certainly discoveries in the lab, those eureka moments that come too rarely, but when they do, it's exciting. What I would say stands out is seeing the success and glow in the eye of a trainee. Those are the moments that bring tears to my eyes. That really is what it's all about. So hearing today that one of my students matched at Children's Hospital, that's a pretty good moment when I knew that was his first choice.
That is truly inspiring. Uh, I imagine all of these moments are incredibly satisfying, but aside from these moments, you also have won a large number of awards, prizes, and recognition for the work you've done. So, how important are those prizes? Not just for you, but for a scientist in general. How important is winning a prize for what you've done?
It's an interesting question. Of course, I'm proud of those prizes and awards, and we all hope for the recognition of our colleagues, which means maybe more than the prize itself, but the sense that your colleagues appreciate the work that you've done. But honestly, I have to say that I think most of us worry more about will we ever get a prize, at least for me, than taking great joy and pride the moment you get it. To me, it's the accomplishment and build-up, getting there, that is more of the achievement than the actual moment of winning an award. But maybe that's my own approach to things. And frankly, as we all know, most of what we do, medicine or research, is a group effort, a team effort. You're standing on the foundation built by so many others. It's hard not to look at the awards and think that they should be divvied up in some way.
Now, I also want to go back to the question of a dual degree. So, for the students or for the trainees at any career, even faculty who are considering getting that extra degree, what is something that they really need to ask themselves to be sure before they get that extra degree, according to you?
I think it's all a matter of whether the investment and the time you think will be worth it in terms of forming your character and the viewpoints that you're able to take in the career that you're trying to carve out for yourself. And of course, you don't know all the answers to those. You don't know what the future is going to bring. So one rule I've always had for myself is sit back, calculate as best I can the cost-benefit ratio, but don't do it if I'm not going to enjoy it while I'm doing it. It doesn't mean I have to enjoy every day of medical school or, but in general, don't go to medical school if you don't think you're going to like medical school. Don't go to medical school just because you want to be a resident. Go to it because you're going to enjoy medical school too. And the same for the other degrees that we go with.
As an administrative leader, what is the secret to keeping everyone happy?
I don't know that secret. I wish I knew that secret. I do think at all times, and my mentors here at Penn and at Harvard before taught me this, that being straight with people, being above board and honest, being professional and not too emotionally tied into tough decisions, that goes a long way. A lot of us appreciate a no if we're told it honestly and quickly. We can get on and do other things. So I find that that's the most important thing in all the many decisions and organizations that I have to interact with now. They just want a straight answer.
That's I think incredible advice. So next, Dr. Epstein, I have a set of rapid fire questions.
Hmm.
So I'll be asking you a set of questions, and your task is to come up with the first response that comes to your mind without thinking about the questions too hard. So my first question is, if you had an extra day in your life, what would you like to do in that day?
Spend it with my family.
If you were not a doctor, what would you have been?
A car mechanic. I love fixing old cars.
What do you think is going to be the next big breakthrough in medical science that will revolutionize the way we deliver medical care?
Truly regenerating tissues and organs.
Okay. Uh, how do you see the role of a physician as being an advocate in the community?
I think we need to be more involved in how our communities lead their lives and the politics that surrounds healthcare.
What is the one habit that helps you make the most out of your time each day?
Impatience.
Thank you so much for being here today, Dr. Epstein. Before we wrap up, I have a special video of yours from several years ago when you were at the Grand Rounds at Beth Israel in Boston. So let's take a look at that video.
That for all our talk and our science, we do only a little. Life cannot be prolonged indefinitely, and death comes at last. But the little we can do has an importance that transcends the patient, for it carries a message to all our patients and to the world. Human beings are important. Well, that's what you and I signed up for. That's the doctor's job. Thank you very much.
For those of you who don't know, Dr. Epstein's father, Dr. Frank Epstein, was one of the great nephrologists I think this country has had. And he was the professor of medicine and the department chair at Harvard for several years. So, how does it feel to have that kind of legacy, Dr. Epstein? Does it, put any extra pressure on you?
I didn't know you were going to show that. I can hear my father saying those words, so that's a hard one for me. Sure, he cared about the patient, my dad, and he certainly drilled that in. He loved taking care of patients, and I certainly hope to bring that legacy forward.
Uh, just to conclude, any last words that you'd like to share with our audience about how they should view the profession of medicine and what they can and cannot do as being a part of the profession?
We hear from each other and from our mentors and our trainees how hard it is, how busy people are, how much they're being asked to do. And I think it's always worth remembering how lucky we are. It's a great career. And you look outside the windows sometimes or in the subways, and there are a lot of other people who work harder than we do and have a tougher life than we do. We're privileged, and we should remember it.
Thank you so much once again for being here, Dr. Epstein. Thank you all for watching. I hope this conversation inspired you in more ways than one. See you all for our next episode. Until then, adios.